Where did I write it? Just tell me so I know what you're
Oh, it was a long time ago.
Okay.
Flyer, yellow flyer. It talks about how welfare, in some instances, welfare might fit into the rights. No?
You're confusing me with somebody else. I never said any such thing.
No. But, yeah, I'll mail it to you.
Okay. People misquote me all the time.
No, it was one of your flyers.
Okay.
Let me think how this was. Making an animal's life better if it meant that particular thing would stop completely, but the whole.
You're talking about single issue campaigns? I mean, because I've written quite a bit about single issue campaigns. I mean, the problem I have with single issue campaigns, by which I mean there are different sorts of single issue campaigns. Any sort of welfare campaign is a single issue campaign, but then there are other single issue campaigns, like, for example, the campaign against the dolphin slaughter in Japan, which I got in, which I addressed a couple weeks ago, where people are saying this has got to stop. And the Japanese are barbaric because they're doing this sort of thing. And I really find that sort of language xenophobic and ethnocentric. And I don't see the difference between killing a bunch of dolphins and killing a bunch of chickens. I really don't. And so when I see animal advocates, particularly those who are not vegan, ranting and raving about the dolphins in Taiji, I look at that and I say, well, I understand why organizations construct campaigns like that. I mean, think about it again. Like, follow the money. And I mean, that's really important. You got to look at what's going on economically. These organizations, these animal welfare charities, they take something like Taiji and they say, all right, this is great. We can promote this as a campaign. And what this does is it basically allows us to reach out to everybody who's not a vegan, right? And they can sign a petition. I mean, I'd like to get a petition against petitions. I cannot stand those petitions on the internet. And they can sign a petition, or they can, whatever, and they feel as though they're doing something. But we don't have to ask them to change. So they can feel good about themselves without changing anything about their lives, which is the prescription, the perfect prescription to get a donation. Make somebody feel better about themselves without asking them to do anything, and they'll write you a check faster than you can understand. And so I think that I have a lot of problems with those. I mean, these campaigns about eating dogs and cats in Korea. Say, oh, these. I don't know if you see the sort of language in which Koreans and Chinese people are characterized on some of that stuff. I mean, it's really, really horrible. And the answer is they don't fetishize dogs and cats. So what? I mean, nobody should be eating dogs and cats. Nobody should be eating cows, pigs, and chickens. So I mean, and so that's the problem I have with single issue campaigns. I mean, I think, look, I got involved with this. I've been doing this now for 32 years of my life. And I've been a vegan that long. I am not dead yet. So those of you who think that there's an issue about health, I mean, I'm always astounded that anyone. Now you have to eat a healthy vegan diet. You can be an unhealthy vegan. There's no doubt about that. But I mean, I'm telling you, it's a great way to eat. And I think that when I got involved in this 32 years ago, the big campaign was the anti-fur campaign. And we got to get rid of fur, and I would not participate in that. As a matter of fact, I once went to an anti-fur rally, and I said I would not speak about fur. I would only talk about animal clothing generally and animal exploitation. And I said I'd like it to be an anti-animal clothing / exploitation rally, and not because I think the fur campaign has always been misguided, and it's always been sexist, and it's always been misogynistic. And I did not want to get involved in it. And there is no moral distinction between fur and leather and wool. I mean, if you know anything about how wool is produced, you would regard it as barbaric and hideous. It is no better than fur. Leather is no better than fur. The only difference is we don't walk up to guys wearing jackets and call them the names that we call women who are wearing fur coats. We don't do that because we are afraid of the violent reaction. But 32 years later, the fur industry is stronger than it was when I got involved with this. It is stronger. As a matter of fact, when I first got involved in this movement, you wouldn't see fur in London. You would not see fur in the 80s and the late 70s and 80s in London. You didn't see fur. Now it's all over the place. I mean, the fur industry is stronger than it's ever been. Single-issue campaigns don't work because they can't work because they don't have any sort of context. if I don't think animal exploitation generally is wrong, why the hell am I going to have sustained anger about fur? Why am I going to have sustained opposition? You might get me angry when you were, I might become angry if you come up to me and hand me a pamphlet showing some cute little baby seals, got those little, the baby seals, the Canadian seals, that's a gift that keeps on giving to those animal groups, because why? Because they're really cute, and they're small, and they sort of lay there, and they got those little eyes, and and they're really, they are really cute, but what's the difference between some cute, moral status shouldn't depend on cuteness. But so you can get somebody upset by saying, oh, here, look at my pamphlet showing some little baby seal getting clubbed. And they might get upset about that. They might even give you a donation. But is that going to change their lives? Are they going to say, oh, wow, their animal rights light just went off? And the answer is no. And the proof of that is 32 years later, we still have, FUR's more pervasive than it was 32 years ago, and the industry's stronger than it's ever been. Look at vivisection. I spent a good deal of the first 10 years I was doing this focusing on vivisection, because at that time I was involved with PETA. I got involved with them in the early 1980s when it was first starting, and I was teaching at the University of Pennsylvania at the time. As a matter of fact, I came to Canada and talked about the Head Injury Clinical Research Laboratory, which was at the University of Pennsylvania, which was a campaign that we had to sort of close that lab, which eventually we did, but because they actually succeeded in violating the Animal Welfare Act, which is very, very, very hard to do. Nevertheless, they did it, but I spent 10 years of my life focusing on vivisection. Now I hardly talk about it at all. Why? Because I have learned something, and that is, as long as people are willing to consume animals and clog their arteries, cause themselves all sorts of health problems, give themselves breast cancer through dairy products and prostate cancer, and they make themselves ill by eating rotting flesh, mucus, and all sorts of crazy things, then you know what? You're never going to get them to say, gee, I don't think they should kill a few more so they can find a cure. Now we can, obviously I don't think they're finding cures, but most people think that vivisectors are finding cures. So if you're willing to make yourself sick, if you're willing to exploit animals and make yourself sick when you can eat perfectly healthy without exploiting them, and somebody says, well, is it okay to kill a few rats to find a cure for cancer? The answer is, that's a no-brainer question. As a matter of fact, we had a guy from UCLA, a vivisector from UCLA, come to Rutgers a couple years ago. I debated the guy, and there were like 300 people in the room. I didn't think there was going to be that many people, but so we had a room that held about, I don't know, it was more people in the room than should have been in the room, and a lot of people. And I started off and I said, let me ask you all a question. How many vegans are there in the group? And there were like a few people raised their hands. I said, this is going to be a very peculiar evening, because it's going to be peculiar because you eat animals. And there is good evidence that by eating animals, you are making yourself sick. You have no reason to eat animals. You don't need to eat animals. You are making yourself sick because you like the taste of animals. And you so devalue the interests of animals and the interests that they have in their lives that you're willing, and to devalue your own interests, that you're willing to eat these animals when you have no reason to do so, and you're making yourself sick. And he's going to argue that rationally you should support using animals to find a cure for the illnesses you have from eating animals, which is, really a no-brainer sort of thing. Of course people are going to. So that's why the anti-vivisection movement has been going since the 19th century. As a matter of fact, that was the first single-issue campaign, was anti-vivisection. And you know what? We are using more animals now in biomedical research than we were when I got involved in this 32 years ago, or at any time in human history. So the reality is, as long as we're eating them, it is my view that as long as we're eating them, we're never going to be able to see clearly about this. And once we stop eating them, everything becomes very, very clear. Yes?
Okay, the question I have actually, because I've seen documentaries on it and I've read about them and stuff too. Well, anyway, there were organizations that have existed to a time, like we had like the Liberation Front and the Animal Liberation Front. Would you say, being that they're not really an organization, I think it's almost more of a tactic or a collaborative group of people that basically go out and do an action, and, as it were. Would you say that, at least in terms of like the public consciousness, like the way they end up getting covered, their actions, do you think that unlike what you were describing, is kind of like, like the
but I mean, I mean, there have been lots of animal liberation front activities
Yeah.
in Britain, and Britain's got more, the use of animals in biomedical research is skyrocketing.
Oh,
So it's
okay.
not clear, I mean, one thing I'm opposed to violence. I had a really interesting discussion in Guelph a few years ago
Okay.
where somebody showed up at Guelph, as a matter of fact, I saw somebody here who looked like that person, and I was thinking, is anybody here in Guelph? Okay. And so I was at Guelph, and this woman showed up, and she said that she was a supporter of the Animal Liberation Front. She said, I have a hypothetical. She said, if a vivisector is using 60 dogs a year, and in biomedical experiments, is it acceptable to use violence against the vivisector? And I said, well, let me ask you a question. I said, is your mother a vegan? And she said, what is that? I said, no, just go with me for a second. Is your mother vegan? And she said, no. And I said, well, what does your mother eat? And she said, well, she doesn't eat beef. I said, okay, I don't know why people think. Anyway, so she doesn't eat beef. I said, what is it that she eats? And she said, she eats chicken. I said, okay. I said, does she eat chicken a couple times a week? And she said, yes. And I said, okay, your mother's responsible for more than 60 chicken deaths a year. Is it okay to use violence against your mother? And she got upset with me and she walked out. But I'm telling you, that's, I have an issue with violence. I don't even understand, the arguments about violence against persons. And I think that, the problem is violence. We're not going to solve it with violence, I don't believe. And so, I am violently opposed to violence. So I think that, as far as what the ALF did, look, at the University of Pennsylvania, those tapes were taken out of that laboratory illegally. No one was ever caught for it, but those things were taken out illegally. And there have been a number of instances in which information has been produced. But the problem is that, one of the reasons why I stopped focusing on vivisection is where did it all go? What's the result now? Is it that people said, oh wow, vivisection is really terrible? And the answer is no. Vivisection is as popular as it's ever been, and more animals are being used than ever. And also I would say something about these ag-gag laws. Look, I'm not in favor of laws that restrict speech. Just as a principle matter, I think it's a bad idea. I think it's wrong. However, this idea that ag-gag laws are going to shut down the animal movement is nonsense. Because we know what's going on in factory farms. It's this thing. They had this new thing. It's called internet. You can find out. You can learn everything you need to learn about what's going on in factory farms. And then what the problem is that the animal organizations are now, because part of what business is for them is getting people to go in and doing these undercover investigations. It's a whole recipe. They do undercover investigation, they come out with glitzy video, they have campaign, they say abuse. The abuser says, no, we're going to rectify it. And then it's like, oh, compassionate exploitation. There's a whole sort of, thing going on there. And now that's going to be, those sorts of efforts are going to be impeded. I don't think that's going to, I think those things are, I think ag laws are bad, but not for the reason that it's gonna dry up information. Ag laws are bad because you shouldn't have laws that restrict and stop people from speaking about things like that. I think that those laws are problematic, but in the same way that I would regard laws that that restrict speech in any way as problematic. I think the campaign against them now is motivated largely because the ability to come up with these campaigns. One of the things that these laws, some of these laws do, is they say if you think something's going on illegally, if you think that there's an abuse or there's a violation of law going on, you have to bring it to the attention of the authorities immediately. Well, that gets in the way of the 2 months it takes for you to sort of cut and splice the film and then get some celebrity to come and narrate it and have music and then have get the fundraising machine ready. And so I don't. I know people are nuts about these ag laws, and again, I don't like them, but I think that you have to understand why these animal groups are opposed to them, and it's not because we will never find out what's going on behind closed doors. And also let me say this: part of my thinking is it doesn't really matter what's going on behind closed doors. It doesn't matter. What if it was better? What if it was better? Does that make it right? And the answer is no, it doesn't. Okay, yes, you in the back. What's your name?
Sorry,
Kathleen.
Just a question for
your
Can you
voice.
hear me better now?
Yeah, I can.
There. Okay, so just to do with violence and like reactive violence, particularly like in ALF action.
Yeah.
What do you consider violence? Because I know there's most of their action, if human or animal life is like there's to be no harm. So, like example, like property damage, like going into a lab and like ruining your files, or in the cases where they've just taken like a truck and set a fire, like set a fire to it. I'm just curious on your opinion.
Well, I mean, look, I'm a law professor. I'm not going to encourage people to engage in violence. Okay, so let me say that. But I also think that as an empirical matter, you are incorrect when you say there's never been physical injuries or I mean, that is absolutely wrong.
No,
There have been.
they're in
Well,
their,
but I mean, first of all, I remember once writing an essay because the Animal Liberation Front website said that anybody could be a member of the Animal Liberation Front who was a vegetarian or vegan. And I wrote an essay called "Is That Milk on Your Balaclava?" And I made the point that how can you be a member of the Animal Liberation Front if you aren't a vegan? I mean, what sense does that make? And people responded, they said, oh, well, you just got that off the ALF website. That's not official. Well, I mean, I don't know your source for the, for what it is they stand for. And it was always my impression that, they were not, well, anyway. But so when you say that they say this, I don't know who they are, and I don't know how one finds out what it is that they say, because when I looked at their website, they were basically saying you didn't have to be a vegan. As a matter of fact, if you look at their website, they promote like every single welfare organization on the planet. So, I mean, I don't even know what that stuff means. And there have been instances in which there has been physical violence against individuals. And setting fire to a truck, is something which, I mean, I remember once having a very interesting discussion with a guy at some conference I was speaking at, something I was speaking at, and he said, well, what's wrong with burning a building down that's empty? And I said, putting aside the fact that it's ours, I mean, the reality is that, a building, even if it's empty, there are animals living in the wall of the building and stuff. And so it's not clear to me that doesn't, that there aren't moral issues there. And so, but look, I mean, the bottom line is, I'm not sure what that stuff does, and I'm not sure what good it does. I really not. I mean, in response to his question, I mean, if it were the case that now in 2014 we had a real diminution in the incidence of vivisection, I would say, well, maybe that stuff worked. Maybe it educated me. Maybe it elevated consciousness. The reality is, ain't the case. Yeah. What's your name?
Jenna.
Jenna. You're like the third Jenna I've met. Is that like a common Canadian name? It's like the third Jenna today.
What can I say to people who say that we don't need to move towards going vegan, we need to move towards buying meat from our neighbors who raise animals out in the open, like grass and sun, they have like long, happy lives?
You say to them, you're wrong. No. Yes. Look, again, it goes back to the idea that, there's less suffering is always better than more suffering. But, beating your slaves less is better than beating your slaves more. But it doesn't answer the question about whether the institution is morally acceptable. And the reality is that animals that are raised in these supposedly idyllic circumstances still suffer a great deal, and ultimately they're shipped to a slaughterhouse. Now, there's some people who slaughter them on the premises, but have you ever seen animal slaughter? Have you ever seen animal slaughter? Okay, you should. You should go to one of these happy farms here, because they're Canadians. They'll probably welcome you in, make some tea, but you should go. You should go, to one of these farms and ask if you can watch them. One that kills on the premises. You should ask them to see it. I can guarantee you something, Jenna. I can guarantee you it'll freak you out. And you will walk away saying, gee whiz, if that wasn't really horrible and violent, I don't know what is. And the answer is slaughterhouses are really, really hideous. But I've also seen slaughter in those sorts of situations you're talking about, where the animal doesn't leave the farm, but they slaughter the animal there, and it's still horrible. You in the back, yes. What's your name? Brittany.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I just wanted to know, you said that you're not really supportive of these, what would you call them?
Bloated corporate charities.
No. So other than veganism, how would you say, what would you say someone could do to support the animal liberation movement or the animal rights movement?
Well, I mean, but that's like saying, I mean, the veganism thing, big issue. I mean, first of all, what I think people should be doing is what I spend my time doing is talking to people. I don't really spend much time in the animal movement anymore, talking to animal people. I talk to groups of people in universities and other sorts of settings and say, if you care about animals, go vegan. Because that's what are you vegan?
Yeah, I don't.
Okay, all right. Do you eat any animal products?
No.
Okay.
But like I said, I don't believe in veganism because there are animal products in almost everything, like chalk and soap and all this stuff. So I don't really call myself a vegan because.
Well, but to the extent that you are able to make choices, you always make choices not to exploit. Okay, fine. That's okay. Good. That's good.
Okay.
All right. And so what I try to do is convince people. What my goal is to say, give me a bunch of people who care about animals, and I want to get them to go vegan. That's what I want to get them to do. Then, once I turn them on to that, I want them to engage in creative, nonviolent vegan advocacy. That's how we are going to change the world. I want to tell you something. There's some people at Rensselaer Polytechnical Institute in upstate New York who did what I think is probably the most important piece of work I have seen in a long time. What they did was they said they did a very complete, detailed statistical survey, and they came up with the idea that if you have 10% of a population that believes strongly in a moral idea, it changes things. And now I'll be, again, for the second time in the same afternoon, conservative about this. This is remarkable. And I will be conservative about this and say that I am willing to say if we had 10% of the population committed to ethical veganism, it would not eradicate itself. It wouldn't eradicate animal exploitation. But what it would do is it would change the conversation. If we had 10% of the population committed to ethical veganism, we would be talking about animal use rather than animal treatment. We would be talking about, can we justify using them rather than how do we humanely exploit them? And I think that's really important, and we can get to that 10%. I have absolutely no doubt about that. But we have to be committed to ethical veganism, not the way, see, a lot of these animal groups, they don't even promote veganism. They promote being veg. I hate it. Be veg. What the hell does that mean? They don't even promote veganism. And to the extent that they do, it's like, well, be compassionate. Another word which is should be removed from the vocabulary given how it's being used. Eat cage-free eggs, eat happy pork, eat this, and if you're really into this, then go veg, and then maybe even go vegan, and it's that sort of thing. They don't present veganism as a moral baseline. Veganism is presented as one amongst a large number of things which supposedly reduce suffering. On my website, on evolutionsapproach.com, I wrote an essay called, I don't remember what it's called, but it was something along the lines of, I don't remember. It was something along the lines of veganism, a way of reducing suffering or a fundamental principle of justice. Was that what it was? Something like that. And the idea was to say, look, veganism is a moral baseline. It's a non-negotiable moral baseline. If you believe animals have moral significance, you are ethically committed to stop eating them, wearing them, using them. End of story. Okay? And so to say that, well, if you care about animals, you just want to reduce suffering, and some people go vegan because they really are interested, and other people should eat cage-free eggs, and and all this sort of stuff. I'm not talking about those people as 10%. If we had 10% of, we probably have 10% of the population who probably agree with that, and it's not going to get us anywhere. What I'm talking about is 10% of the population who believes that veganism is a moral baseline will change the world. Yes?
I'm wondering.
What's your name? Emily.
I'm wondering what you think the best or most effective way for average students or community members like us to convert people to stop eating
that's a good question. Each of us, we have to get away from this idea about leaders, that we have to look for leaders who are going to do this. And no leader's going to do this for you. You're going to have to. This is either our problem or it, it's not going to be solved. And what I think, like my basic way of sort of thinking about this is I never let a day go by where I don't have a conversation with somebody about it. And you find, once you start getting into the flow of it, you find that it's almost impossible to avoid talking about it with people. So when I'm at the supermarket, and I'm in a line, and I got a cart, and and somebody looks at my cart and says, I mean, this happens to me all the time. Somebody says, that looks really healthy. And I turn to that person and say, I'm a vegan. I don't eat, and then I end up getting, this happens to me all the time. This must have happened to me probably 50 times in the past year. It happened to me not long ago. Actually it was in Whole Foods, because now all of the small health food stores have been driven out of business because Trader Joe's and Whole Foods basically have driven them out of business because they underprice them. So the small places I used to like to shop are no longer in existence. So I'm at Whole Foods, and there's this woman in back of me, and there's a person in front of me. There was someone in front of me, and he was putting his stuff on the conveyor, and I was behind him, and this woman's behind me, and she says, that looks really healthy. I had like a huge amount of kale because I bought a dehydrator. You know what a dehydrator is? And I was making kale chips, and I love those things. And so, and instead of spending $73 for a small box, I decided I was just going to buy the kale and make it myself. So I had like a lot of kale, and I had other sorts of stuff in there. And she says, that looks really healthy. And I was looking at her cart. She had she had meat, and she had the eggs, and she had milk. And I said, yeah, I'm a vegan. And she said, you are? And I said, yes. And she said, how do you get your protein? And when somebody asks you that question, even though you've been asked that question 33 million times in your life, you can't indicate irritation or non-engagement because then you will lose that person. So you say, well, I'm glad you did. And you explain that, well, actually most Americans eat far more protein than they need. We can get all of the protein we need from plant sources, and then I proceed to list them. And I have some of these things in my cart, and I say, you could eat this, and you could eat this. And she says, is it healthy for you? And I said, well, let me tell you, I don't remember the last time I was ill. I don't remember the last time I had a flu or a virus. I am 60 years old, and I feel better than I did when I was 25. And that's the truth. And I told her, I said, everybody in my family, they have high cholesterol and high blood pressure. I have low cholesterol and low blood pressure. I never get sick. I got bad genes. My family genes are such that if I ate animal products, I have cholesterol through the roof. And the last time I had my cholesterol tested, they tested it again because they thought it was too low for a guy my age, and it was not accurate. And so this idea, and I tell you, then we got into it. It was interesting because it was great because the guy in front of me had like a huge number of things, so I was able to talk to her for a while. And then she said, well, I only buy, when she takes out this rotting flesh and she shows it to me, and she says, I only buy animal welfare rating 3 or higher or whatever. And I said, well, let me tell you. I said, do these animals suffer less? Maybe a little less. But let me tell you, they are still raised under circumstances where if humans were involved, we would regard it as torture. And they're all sent to the same slaughterhouse anyway. So, I've now gotten health into this conversation. I've now got morality into this conversation. And we then ended the conversation by her asking me for how she could write to me by email. Now, she hasn't written yet, but she will. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But basically, I have conversations with anybody I can talk to. Guys, people at the gas, if I'm gassing up. Well, why do you think Michael Vick is a bad guy? And the thing of it is that we can all do this. You're a student here? Okay, well, great. You're a student in the university. You have contact with zillions of young people, right? And so talk to them about it. And it's really important, I think, to sort of bring it to the individual in terms of I find it very effective when I say to a student, you have a dog you love? Yeah. Okay, tell me the difference between the dog you love and the animal you stick a fork into. And I think for the most part, I have to tell you, and you know what? Nobody has the answer for that, and they all get irritated by it. They get provoked by it, which is great because and don't you have to education, particularly when you're talking about this sort of thing. You can't get upset when people get angry with you, because generally people get angry with you because you're provoking them and you're challenging fundamental assumptions they have. Actually, I find it when somebody gets angry with me, I actually find it. I see a big green light, educate me, going on. Now sometimes it doesn't work that way, but I think that it does work that way a lot of times. That if somebody's blasé, but if somebody's angry, if somebody gets agitated, say, well, I think that's wrong. It's wrong. Why is it wrong? And you need to educate yourself first, so that you have responses. So if somebody says to you, somebody gives you an objection, you need to be able to respond to it. And you'll find, one of the reasons why I wrote this, that Anna and I wrote this book, Eat Like You Care, was we basically make the argument about why people should be eating vegan, and then we have 31 or 32 or whatever excuses that people use, but it's natural to eat meat, but where will I get my protein? But God wants us to eat meat, and address those things. And it's it's really interesting. If you read the things, the explanations are not that complicated. You just need to learn what they are. So you need to educate yourself. You can educate others. And you can do this stuff. Last night in Western Ontario, we had the God question. We had the plain question. We had the God question. And it was like but God, our Maker, wants us to eat. And I said, well, look, I really I teach law and philosophy. I'm not a priest. I don't really want to get into theology. I said, you ought to read Genesis. If you're a Christian, if that's your thing, then you ought to read Genesis, which is the first book of the Bible, in which it is fairly clearly stated. As a matter of fact, it is as clearly stated as it possibly could be that in the beginning, when God creates the world, God says, "The herb and the seed, it shall be your food." The herb and the seed. There is no killing until there's a rupture in the covenant between God and humans. And humans are expelled from Eden. And if you read later on in the Old Testament, you see that when the covenant is restored, the lion shall lay down with the lamb, and none shall be killed in all of my holy kingdom. So my view is, if that's your thing, then you ought to read your thing. And what you will see is that killing animals was an accommodation that was made to humans for their fallen state. And I have to tell you something. When you pull that on somebody who's like giving you the religion argument, boom, stops them dead. So yeah, you got to educate yourself, but do it. Spend some time educating yourself. One thing that is really important, or actually two things, is teaching people that and giving them explanations. For example, learning that the fantasy that everybody has that if women don't eat animal foods, and particularly milk, they're going to get osteoporosis. It is criminal. It is criminal that misinformation is allowed to be promulgated by industry, and that media, which is owned by industry anyway, repeats it. Because the reality is, if you eat animal products, it causes your body to become acidified. That's not what your body wants to do, because your body wants to have an alkaline environment. So what happens is when you eat animal products, it causes your body to become acid, your body wants to correct itself, and your body then leaches calcium from your bones so that it can restore alkalinity. I know tons of women who are vegans and none of them have osteoporosis. I know lots of women who aren't vegan and many of them have osteoporosis. So, so you need to learn the basic health stuff. And basically, look, not even the American Dietary Association, which is an arch-conservative organization, they say that a plant-based diet, they say a vegetarian diet, including exclusively plant-based diet, vegan diet, is perfectly healthy for humans at all stages of life, including pregnancy, for bodybuilders. I have students at Rutgers who are vegans, and these guys, like, they have these ripply bodies, they do the weightlifting and stuff like that. They're perfect. I mean, these guys are like, you guys see them. I mean, these guys are really quite sculptured or whatever. Yeah. So educate yourself, educate others. Yes, your name is.
I'm Sarah.
Sarah, hi.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
I have a question about. You mentioned you have non-human companion animals
Yes.
with you.
Yes.
Rescues.
Well, not with me, but I
Not
have.
at this very moment, but
Yes.
at home.
Yes.
What is your view on forced sterilization to control the overpopulation?
You will not meet, on planet Earth, you will not meet any human being who likes hanging out with dogs any more than I do. Except for maybe Anna. We both love them. And if it were up to us as to whether or not if there were 2 dogs left in the world, and it was my decision as to whether or not they continued to breed so that we could have pets, the answer would be not on your life. I think domestication raises serious moral concerns. As a matter of fact, I'm just about to have this discussion with Will Kamlicka and Sue Donaldson are coming to Rutgers in the 11th. As a matter of fact, you're all invited. It's free. We're not charging. I mean, we're having this conference on April 11th. Anna and I are going to speak. Will and Sue are going to speak. And David Nybert's going to be there, who's a sociologist. Gary Steiner's going to be there, who's a philosopher. We're going to have other people there. It's going to be really exciting. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk, because Will disagrees with me. He thinks, well, at least I'm not clear what Will thinks, but I think Will thinks that domestication is not inconsistent with recognizing the moral status of animals. I don't. I think that the idea that we breed animals to be perpetually dependent on us, and so that, you know, like I love our dogs, but the reality is they're dependent on me for when they eat, when they sleep, when they go out. You know, they're perpetually dependent, and I think that they're not animals, they're not human. I mean, they live in this nether world of vulnerability and dependence, and they're sort of dependent on us for everything. And I think that's wrong, and so I think domestication is wrong. And so my view is that we ought not to have domesticated animals at all. And so as far as I'm concerned, if you get to the point where you say, now if you don't agree with me there, then you're not going to agree with me with the next step. But if you say that, yeah, I can see that domestication presents moral issues, and maybe you're right that that it's immoral, then if you ever get to a point in life where you say, well, yeah, I agree that something is immoral, but I have a moral obligation to perpetuate it, that makes no sense to me. So my view is that if we genetically engineered a group of humans who had the intelligence of they had normal physical appearance and whatnot, but that they had the intelligence of they had very low level of intelligence, and in our case we would make them president, as we had for 8 years with Bush, but if we use these people to do dangerous things, dangerous work. We genetically engineered them. They don't have families. Nobody cares about them, and we genetically engineer them, and they're doing labor in environmentally bad situations. And then we figured out one day that this was a really bad idea. To say that, well, they have an interest in continuing to have sex and to procreate, and they have that interest, and so therefore we have to let them do that. The answer is, once you decide that this is a morally monstrous situation that you have created, then you've got an obligation to do something. And so, yeah, I'm not. I mean, I obviously. I mean, I would be happy with a tubal ligation or vasectomy. The problem is if you have males and females, and the female continues to be in heat, the males will drive them nuts. So, I'm in favor of like the least intrusive thing possible. But yeah, I don't think we should have domesticated animals. As a matter of fact, we should live with our species. They should live with, there should be 2 groups: us, the animals living in the wild, and then the animals that like hang out with us, like squirrels and chipmunks, and little cute things, and baby seals and all that. But I don't believe we should have. I look, the dogs we have are dogs that would have been killed if we didn't adopt them. And so I think we have an obligation to care for those animals. But I think domestication should end. I think it's a very bad idea. I think it's a very, very, very bad idea. By the way, they're all vegan. See, our dogs are all vegan. They're very healthy.